ladies and gentlemen. I'm just wondering, having attended this conference for the past 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, and today, Wednesday, I'm wondering, why is it that ignorance is not described as a weapon of mass destruction? Just like nuclear weapons that the United Nations organization is declared as a weapon of mass destruction. Ignorance destroys much more than nuclear weapons. So why is it that ignorance is not declared a weapon of mass destruction? Think about how we are destroying human beings by casting spells of ignorance on them. Some of them in our universities, we invite students, we ask them to pay very huge fees, but we never ask ourselves, are we not casting spells of ignorance on the poor students that we are making, we are asking to pay fees in the first place? Are we teaching them? Is it knowledge? Is it ignorance that we are casting on them? We perhaps need to ask deeper questions in our universities. I wish to start by drawing your attention to this cartoon. This cartoon says a lot about ignorance. If we educate students in courts, we graduate them, we give them diplomas and degrees. There may be bachelor's degrees, there may be master's degrees, there may be PhDs. We may even give them postdoctoral researcher certificates. But what is happening in the real world? Are these diplomas and degrees connected to knowledge, or what is considered knowledge in the African societies in which our universities are based? Are they useful? Very soon, perhaps, our graduates will come back to our universities to retain the degrees because they are not working. There's no knowledge that we promised in the degrees when we gave them the certificates. There's nothing there except ignorance, half-truths. We tell them the degree will be magic to you. Once you get the certificate, it's magical. It will open up the world. But what is really happening in the world? They are getting useless papers. We are telling them half-truths about what we are teaching them so that they pay fees. It's fraudulent. It's scandalous that we are doing. We are other people of corruption elsewhere, but are we not corrupt if we tell our students half-truths about the magical qualities of the certificates that we are giving them, the knowledge in courts that we are delivering to them, which is actually ignorance, which is actually destroying the universities, the students. Okay. All right. Having said that, let me start by expressing my gratitude to the Wits University, to Professor Melissa and her team. There is my brother there, William, there is Tulani somewhere there. I know some of them. Thank you very much for organizing this very timely conference, which speaks to very topical, relevant and compelling issues of our time. Ignorance is itself some kind of a special operation. We might think there is a special operation ongoing in Ukraine. We call it a Russian special military operation. But when we cast spells of ignorance on other people, consider that also a special operation. Perhaps a special ignorance operation because you are casting a spell of ignorance on somebody else. The geopolitics of ignorance, which derives from the title of my presentation, the geopolitics of ignorance in the age of the ontological 10. That term geopolitics of ignorance, which I use here, is intended to deliberately invoke and connect to special operations, some of them declared and others undeclared, that are executed in the world in efforts to defeat the minds of others when ignorance is deliberately socially created. With new technologies, including BrainNet, or cerebral internet, which connects human brains to the Internet of Things, it will become extremely difficult to retain the independence of mind that is essential for activist politics. The point that I'm making here is that there are developments that are ongoing, technological innovations that are ongoing, that speak to matters of politics and practice of ignorance that we are sitting here to deliberate on. Part of the new technologies that speak to the politics and practice of ignorance include what is called brain nets or cerebral internet, which would connect your mind to the internet. And I'm inviting you here to critically consider the implications of such new technologies on questions of ignorance, on questions of politics of ignorance and the practice of ignorance. In fact, once human minds are connected using brain nanobots, they are brain nanobots which are minute. You won't even see them, but there are some sort of computers and some robots of sorts. So, in fact, once human minds are connected using brain nanobots to the brain net or cerebral internet, it becomes possible to read the human minds and engage in preventive policing, what is called preventive policing, wherein actions are prevented before they are performed or executed. In other words, a world in which the brain net or cerebral internet is set in is a world of post-politics and a realm of post-activism, insofar as the new technologies to read and understand the human brain make it possible to preempt actions of political opponents. What are the implications of this on the activism that some of us discussed on Monday here? The new technologies to control the mind. What are the implications on politics generally and on politics of and practice of ignorance? On the activism, you want to be an activist, but your mind is controlled. That the future of warfare is in the form of neural warfare, which is fought in the human minds once the neuroscience of brain nanobots, the neuroscience of brain nanorobotic implants, brain-computer interfaces, and brain-cloud interfaces has matured. In the light of the foregoing, it is exceedingly important to do horizon scanning to see where the world is going and how geopolitics of ignorance is playing out with emergent technologies. To deal with emerging technologies, which can be used for both beneficial and harmful purposes, the World Health Organization has recently drafted some regulations to govern what is called the responsible use of life sciences research and the dual research of concern, which I was part of in 2021. The point that I'm making is that the half-truth that we are sitting here to think about, we are told the new technologies are beneficial to us. We are only told about the benefits of the new technologies, but we are not told about the possible harmful effects, possible harmful uses of the new technologies. In order for us to defeat ignorance, we need to know the two sides of the coin. What are the benefits? But what about the other side? Because at the end of the day, when we do they call it a balance sheet, I guess, we want to know both sides so that we can do effective evaluations of what is going on in the world. Technologies which can be possibly used for harmful and beneficial purposes to humanity. The point I'm making is that it is necessary for us to teach not only one side, teach both sides. But as we already know, transnational corporations, in spite of the regulations that the World Health Organization is drafted in 2021, the transnational corporations that run the world, actually, it's not our states. It's not the South African state that is running the world. It's not the Zimbabwean state that is running the world. It's not the Zimbabwean state that is running the world. I think so is to take comfort in the world of ignorance. The world is actually run by transnational corporations. We may blame our leaders. We blame Ramaphosa. We blame the Zambian president, Hichilema. We blame the Botswana president. We blame everybody. But those are not the people that are actually running the world. They are just figureheads. The transnational corporations are much more powerful than our states. They are actually the ones that are running the states. I'm not saying that we must not take them to account. But the point is, in order for us to dispel ignorance, we must know who is actually running the world. So those transnational corporations, including global pharmaceutical corporations, are not easy to govern because they are often more powerful than African governments. This is why even when they perform or perpetrate human rights violations across the world, they are not taken even to the ICC, to the International Criminal Court. Not even to our own to courts in our own jurisdictions. I mean, Shnan, for instance, tells us that neuroweapons, which are part of the new emerging technologies, are intended to influence, direct, weaken, suppress, or neutralize human thought, brainwave functions, perception, interpretation, and behaviors, to the extent that the target of such weaponry is either temporarily or permanently disabled, mentally compromised, or unable to function normally. We are saying here there are developments in neuroscience which are emerging from the new technologies, including nanotechnology, including biotechnology, including information technology. And these developments have impacts on questions of ignorance that we are talking about, in the sense that out of the developments in the new technologies, we have what are called nanobots, which I just mentioned a while ago, which can be injected into your body and then they travel to your brain and scan your brain, kind of and transfer the brain to some technological substrates. And because of those new technologies, including nanobots, the mind can be remotely controlled by somebody else. They can even punish you by doing something remotely to your brain. Because now we've got some nanobots inside, which connect the outside and the inside. And the point that I'm making is that the ongoing Russian special military operation in Ukraine is not the only one we should count, because there are also special ignorance operations designed to anesthetize and paralyze the minds of other humans in the geopolitics of ignorance, which I speak about today. The emerging neuroscience innovations are just one instance of how the emerging technologies can be used to control humanity in the sense of controlling and manipulating the human minds. For this reason, they can be understood as special operations to manipulate the human minds. In foresight studies, the anthropology and sociology of anticipation, I wish to argue that decolonial thinkers need not only to seek to decolonize the past and the present, but that they must also endeavor to decolonize the future on the basis of imaginaries enabled by developments in technoscience. Africans are increasingly outsourcing their minds. They are increasingly outsourcing their thinking to new technologies. What inputs does that have on the questions of ignorance? When you outsource your thinking, you outsource your mind, you outsource your memory to technological devices. Are you not facilitating ignorance? You don't remain knowledgeable, you don't remain intelligent once you've outsourced your thinking to somebody else or to some technological device. Africans are increasingly cognitively offloading their memories to new technologies, technological devices as well. But what is the import of that on questions of ignorance? When you outsource, you cognitively offload your thinking to some device or to somebody else. But imperialism is delegating its tasks to algorithms, resulting in what is called the algorithmic racism. So imperialists now do not necessarily have to perpetrate imperial crimes or actions or wrongs or whatever you call them directly. Algorithms will do the work for them, even in their absence. They are just delegating the tasks. Or whatever they've done in the past centuries will now be done by algorithms. So we are still in the old centuries or whatever you call them, because things are not changing. You might think they are changing. They might make you believe that they are changes. But in fact, we are still where we were centuries ago. The point here is that much as they have pleaded ignorance for the crimes of enslaving and colonizing Africans, imperialists of the 21st century who are again ignorance of algorithmic racism, because such racism is committed by algorithms which are deemed to be autonomous. It's just the robot which is doing it. It's not me. Differently, it's freezing. It appears this thing is freezing. Put differently, we are living in a century where humanity continues to suffer the spells of ignorance in clear and stingy sense of Western capitalists committing sorcery through their apparatuses of capture, which explain the present-day geographies of ignorance in the world. It's about apparatuses of capture. These apparatuses of capture come in various forms. Some may be very appealing, very alluring, and looking very innocent, but they are apparatuses of capture nevertheless. Sorcery is defined in terms of cannibalizing, physically, remotely, and invisibly controlling other human beings against their wishes. But one would agree with Bruno Latour that even the Westerners have never been modern, precisely because humanity has never been able to overcome the drive to cannibalize others. When we come here, I'm saying when we come, whatever that we refers to, do biopiracy, for example. We are saying indigenous knowledge systems are being sort of cannibalized through biopiracy. I don't tell you that your knowledge is very useful. I tell you that your indigenous knowledge is useless. But at the same time, we are coming here to perpetrate biopiracy. We are stealing your knowledge. And then we take it there, we patent that knowledge, we bring it back here, and we ask you to pay for it. That is cannibalism. While geopolitics more conventionally may be understood in terms of spatial distribution of bodies that are killable, the geopolitics of ignorance should be understood in terms of cartographies of strategic manufactured ignorance, which explains the connections between ignorance and colonized geographies in the world. Why is it that we are assumed, say, for example, in the global south, to be ignorant or to know much less than people in the global north? Why is that so? Do we know much less? Or do we know perhaps more than they do? Why are we assumed here to know much less? Is that a fact? Or it is something else? Because ignorance differs in its density between different regions of the world. Some occupying regions of high density of ignorance, medium density, and low densities of ignorance. But the enslaved and colonized people have tended to occupy regions of high density ignorance, not because they could not innovate and create knowledge, but because it was strategic for colonizers to manufacture ignorance in those regions. While slave owners, for instance, described the enslaved African Americans as disingenuous, uncreative, and ignorant, same slave owners patented inventions. They enslaved African Americans in their own names, arguing that since they owned the slaves, they therefore also owned the inventions by the slaves. So the enslaved African Americans were considered to be ignorant. But at the same time, there were predatory relations between the slave owners and the enslaved Africans. They patent the inventions of those that were enslaved. But at the same time, they would describe the enslaved African Americans as ignorant, when in fact they were patenting inventions by the enslaved African Americans. A map of the countries which produced COVID-19 vaccines. Perhaps if we were to draw a map of which countries invented COVID-19 vaccines, and those that didn't or that failed to produce the COVID-19 vaccines. See what I mean by geographies of ignorance in the world. We are assumed to be ignorant. Or perhaps we have actually become ignorant because we actually couldn't produce our own COVID-19 vaccine. That could be evidence that we have actually, in fact, become ignorant. The open-ended dismissals of African cures for COVID-19 indicates what I call the geopolitics of ignorance, wherein, for purposes of monopolizing profits from vaccines and other medicines, some regions of the world are quick to dismiss alternative medicines and vaccines from other parts of the world. Of course, Africans have had the equivalence of vaccines in pre-colonial times. You can't rationally say there were no pandemics or epidemics in pre-colonial times. But if we ever asked ourselves, how did Africans in pre-colonial times manage or treat or prevent epidemics and pandemics? Perhaps they were more intelligent than ourselves in the pre-colonial era because they have their own mechanisms to prevent pandemics. Of course, Africans, like we said, have had the equivalence of vaccines in pre-colonial times, but in the 21st century, we are made to believe that there are no African alternatives to vaccines produced in the global north. Is that a fact? Is that ignorance? We are told that Western science is always in the service of humanity, in spite of the evidence that such science was also used to eliminate anti-apartheid activists, as reflected in the Operation Project Cost, for example, which was a top secret chemical and biological weapons program of the 1980s, instituted by the South African apartheid government. The point here is that we are unfortunately advised to forget the crimes of Western science and only remember the good things that science does for humanity. This is part of what I mean by the geopolitics of ignorance. Similarly, the colonial governments in Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, ordered archaeologists to state that the great pre-colonial architectural feat at Great Zimbabwe was built by Phoenicians rather than by indigenous Zimbabweans, which is what I mean by the geopolitics of ignorance. As part of the geopolitics of ignorance, colonialists ignored the feats of irrigation engineering by pre-colonial Africans. Instead, they chose to describe the pre-colonial Africans as illiterate, as irrational, illogical, as without science, without jurisprudence, without law, without courts, without history, without civilization, and without notions and practices of ownership of resources. Indeed, colonized peoples were also described as indistinct from non-humans. And writers like Pliny described the colonized peoples as having no heads, as having eyes on their chests, as having one big foot, which also served as an umbrella when it was hot or raining. So the cultures which the colonized people were would supposedly simply sit down and raise the big foot for an umbrella when it was too hot or raining, according to Pliny. Indeed, other Western writers describe the colonized as having tails and as cannibalists who could not distinguish between human flesh and both. This is part of what I mean by geopolitics of ignorance. When, for strategic reasons, colonialists cast some regions of the world as ignorant. The geopolitics of ignorance plays strategic functions for colonialists and capitalists Because a person who is described as irrational cannot, by extension, own, control, and possess resources, which are then deemed to be up for grabs by the colonizers. Similarly, a person who is depicted as illogical cannot, by extension, only control and possess resources, which are then deemed up for grabs by the colonialists. Besides, a person who is depicted as indistinct from a non-human animal cannot, by extension, own, control, and possess resources, which are then deemed to be up for grabs by the colonialists. And a person who is depicted as illiterate cannot, by extension, take stock of that which is stolen from him or her, because he supposedly cannot count and read. So these kind of descriptions, these kinds of representations were in fact meant to facilitate the dispossession of the colonized people. Because you are irrational, you can't own. Because you are illogical, you can't own the resources. Because you are indistinct from an animal, from a monkey or a baboon, therefore you can't own your resources. The resources belong to us, therefore. This was the logic. In other words, geopolitics of ignorance refers to attributions of ignorance for strategic reasons to other people living in other regions of the world. It also involves actively manipulating the minds of the targeted people such that they begin to believe they are or they actually become ignorant. Colonialists devised many ways, including education and religion, that were used to colonize the minds, to make Africans believe that they were ignorant, and to socially create ignorance among the colonized people. And as we are holding this conference today, we are told that there are new commercial techno-scientific innovations that and edit human memories, such that it will, in quotes, increasingly become easy to forget unpleasant memories. But if you create technologies to delete and edit my memories, what are the implications on the politics and practices of ignorance? So we are never told anything about the implications of such technologies for the geopolitics of ignorance, or in the imagined mind control, memory editing, and memory deletion technologies are also used to socially create ignorance in some regions of the world. In any case, colonialists have historically dispossessed Africans of material resources, and with imagined mind control, memory editing, and deleting technologies, it will be easy to similarly dispossess other people of their minds and memories. As we are holding this conference, we are also told that there are techno-scientific innovations to edit and delete human genes, such that we end up, in quotes, with databases of humans. What is being called new eugenics. But we are never told anything about the implications of such technologies for the social production of ignorance and the attendant geopolitics of ignorance about which I'm speaking today. Once genes edited and deleted is to use the basis for claims for reparations and restitution for historical wrongs. After all, genealogies are the foundations for heritages, such that to tamper with genealogies and genetics is by extension to tamper with heritages. After all, one becomes a new and different entity after the application of imaging, nanofabrication, synthetic biology, and genome editing. We are also told that there are techno-scientific innovations to scan and transfer human minds from the biological brain to the clouds and to technological substrates. We are never told about the implications of that. Of course, technoscience is a term coined by scholars like Bruno Latour, the late Bruno Latour, to refer to the connections between science, technology, society, and politics. In other words, there are no longer any pretensions of separations between science and politics of the emerging technoscience. So if there are no separations between science and politics, you can imagine what that means. Okay. Okay. Let me wrap up. I'll just read to you one quote here, and then I can say a few things by way of wrapping up. When African countries, the colonial territories, were getting independence, the colonial governments decided to destroy archives, including here in South Africa, archives that could have been useful for the post-colonial South African government, for example, were destroyed by the colonial government. That was part of what we are calling the creation of ignorance here. That the African governments or the former colonial territories are unable to govern themselves now. Might it because the archives were destroyed? And so they're governing in realms of ignorance? We must think about that question. I will read to you one quotation here from Cobain. Cobain writes, opening quotes, Northern Rhodesia, colonial officials were issued with further orders to destroy all papers which are likely to be interpreted either reasonably or by my lies as indicating racial prejudice or religious bias on the part of Her Majesty's government. Detailed instructions were issued over methods of destruction in order to erase all evidence of the purge. When documents were burnt, the rest should be reduced to ash, and the ashes broken up. While any that were dumped at sea must be packed in crates and dumped in very deep free water at maximum practicable distance from the coast. This was part of the creation of ignorance in the colonial governments at the moment when African governments were gaining independence. But the question that I need to take you to now is, connect the whole presentation, is by way of strategically positioning themselves for perpetual dominance in the world and even in the former colonies, the colonizers destroyed archives, national archives. Imagine technologies, massive technologies that are now getting into our bodies, and they not destroy our minds, the archives that are up there in the mind. That's the question we need to ask ourselves. What are the implications for the geopolitics of ignorance? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sorry for the pressure.
No problem.
Great. No, thank you very much, Prof. Apologies for the pressure. We have 5 minutes left. I think we can be able to fit in 2 to 3 very succinct questions.
I hope I can be as succinct as you've requested. So, thanks, Prof, for that presentation. I was just presenting the perspective on sort of how new technology is promoted as something that will offer marginal communities some form of visibility. But particularly in question with algorithmic bias, sort of the algorithms as the organization of knowledge. and how the new tech presents a platform for some maybe subtler methods enforcing racial stereotypes. I'll give an example of which was criticized in 2015. If you search the term sort of gorilla, right? When closed and called for immediate action, just that gorilla or chimp, but that doesn't necessarily that the algorithm of that blackness represents necessarily changed, right? So I'm just thinking, what is the perspective around that of stereotype?
It was really interesting, and I think it took us to places we need to go and think about. I wanted to ask you about your comment on transnational corporations. I was wondering if perhaps you could share some examples of who they are, and I was wondering if that extends into your multilateral organizations like the UN and groups like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I think the conspiracy theorist in me was going a little bit wild as you were speaking, but I just wanted to ask you specifically about the idea of the destruction of a physical archival space that's currently happening now, even in Sharpeville, the Sharpeville precinct, it's kind of in shambles. So I wanted to find out about the process of digitization and if you actually think that digitizing archives is actually some way for us to implant our own kind of narratives within the digital space. But on top of that, there's also that implication that you seem to have that there is safety in the net and that we need to actually engage in it. So is there safety in us actually digitizing our archives? Yeah.
Okay, I will start with the last question about digitization of archives. The term conspiracy theory is itself designed to manufacture and foist ignorance. There are actually conspirators in the world. Okay? Colonialism itself was about conspirators. When they said at the Berlin Conference, they were conspiring actually, isn't it? So when I mean, if you're an African and you got wind of what was happening at the Berlin Conference, those people that were sitting there would have dismissed me as a conspiracy theorist. It was that these people were actually conspiring. So the term conspiracy theory is itself, I wouldn't say just culpable, but it is itself not innocent. Okay, you may read one of my books, my book publications in 2021, which is entitled how did I, sorry. There are more than 20 of them. I'm trying to retrieve one in the archives. It's too many. Another one is in the process of coming. This is just 3 chapters that are left. Before the end of the year, it will be out. It's called Patrolling Epistemic Borders in a World of Borderless Pandemics. That's the title of the book. Sorry for the delay in retrieving the title. Okay. In terms of digitization of archives, like I said, the general research of concern is not dismissive of the new technologies, but it is only saying that there are beneficial sides and harmful sides. Question then is, how do we protect ourselves from the harmful effects while enjoying the beneficial side? So digitization is not itself bad, but what we need to be on guard is, we need to ensure we don't expose ourselves. We don't render ourselves vulnerable to the harmful side. But what we need to know is that when we digitize, for instance, indigenous knowledge systems, and it begins to circulate in cyberspace, does it remain indigenous? Your indigenous knowledge, because it's now no longer indigenous because it's circulating in cyberspace. So it could be another technique of creating ignorance. We become ignorant that the knowledge is yours because it's now spaceless. It's now in cyberspace. It's now not local. It's been digitized. It's out there in cyberspace. That's one. The second question, I'll go to the second question, which is about TNCs. The global, I mean by TNCs, I mean the transnational corporations. You may think about even the corporations that manufactured vaccines for us. They are part of the TNCs. Moderna, Pfizer, BioNTech, and so on. They are part of the very powerful TNCs. Syngenta, and others, which are in the food industry, for example. Some are in the global pharmaceutical industry, others are in the global food industry, others are into mining industry. All those are transnational companies that have branches everywhere else, but they are based in the global north. They are, of course, connected with multilateral institutions like the United Nations Organization. Why? Because in 2005, when this Ghanaian Kofi Annan was the Secretary General in 2005, we introduced what is called the Global Compact. The Global Compact is about putting together the United Nations itself and the transnational corporations so that they work together. Because the United Nations organization itself does not have money to run the world or govern the world. It gets its money from the TNCs, from the transnational corporations. So this is why, in fact, I said in the first place, the world is governed by transnational corporations, not all these other ones, not even our states. They are behind everything that's going on. Remember, in the World Organization itself, it's funded by some transnational corporations and some global elites and so on and so forth who are behind it and behind its policies. Okay, I hope that suffices. The first and last, there is what is called simianization, where Africans are considered to be cousins of monkeys and baboons, and even dogs. So you see that simianization is part of the creation of ignorance, in the sense that once you are simianized, they say you are a monkey or a baboon, like I said, then it means they've effectively retrenched you from claiming ownership of your resources. Because a baboon would not claim ownership of land. A monkey would not claim ownership of land. It's part of the colonial strategies, which we see, even in the algorithms themselves, there is that kind of stuff which is ongoing. This is why I said earlier on that you might think things have changed. In fact, we are still where we were centuries ago. It's what is called the eternal return of empire. It's always there. What it does is that it's just that it changes its codes. When it changes its codes, then it wants you to believe that it has changed actually, its essence. You might want to read a book by Passavandi and Dean. That book is entitled The Empire's New Clothes. Just changes its clothes, but not its assets. Thank you.